Welcome to the Analytics Engineering Podcast, featuring conversations with practitioners inventing the future of analytics engineering. Welcome to the Analytics Engineering Podcast. This week, I'm speaking with Matt Turck. Matt's a partner at Firstmark Capital, been a longtime investor in the data and AI landscape, and is one of the most deeply knowledgeable observers of the field. Matt just recently released his annual MAD landscape for 2024. That's machine learning, AI, and data, which includes over 2,000 logos. In this conversation, we dug into the trends he observed in preparing this year's report. Without further ado, let's get into it. Matt Turck, welcome to the Analytics Engineering Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's cool. Like a few weeks ago, you were on my podcast, and we had this back and forth as to who was on whose podcast. So now I'm excited to be on your podcast.
This is how professional podcasters do it. Yeah, we're audience sharing. You released a piece of content this year. I like your content marketing strategy. I think you release like one big banner piece of content every year. Is that right?
Mostly, yes. And it's mostly because once I'm done with it, I just don't want to write anything else for a year.
Once you're done with it, you have to get back to your day job of actually investing in startups.
Yes. Thanks for reminding me.
That dropped, as of now when we're recording, that dropped what, a week ago, something like that?
Last Sunday evening, I experimented with publishing something on a Sunday evening.
Oh, very nice. I've been following this for now, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. I can't even. How long have you been doing it?
So it's the 10th edition of it, but I've actually been doing it since 2012. So I sort of skipped effectively a couple of years, depending on the month of publication. But yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about this year's report? How many logos? What changes did you make to the structure of it from last year?
2011 logos, up from 1,416. And, I think we're way past the point where that's too many logos on a page. So I'm very cognizant of that. It's actually funny because, each time we publish this, we get two types of feedback. One is like, wow, this just so many logos, too many logos, or that's half of the feedback. And half of the replies I get on Twitter and all the things are like, well, how about like AI for robotics and AI for agriculture, and why is my company not in 12 boxes? Because we do all the things. So like people want more logos for reasons I completely understand and agree with. But that's a lot of logos. The way I think about the number of logos on this is actually representative of the reality of the industry. So you can be more selective and put less logos, but like the reality of the industry is that there's been actually two waves of enormous explosion of company creation and company funding. One around data infrastructure, which you're obviously very familiar with, that sort of started with Hadoop and, all the way to the modern data stack. So that's one. And then in parallel or in addition to that, there is a second wave of company creation, which is really around machine learning and AI, and particularly generative AI now. With the same thing, bunch of new companies, bunch of VCs funding them. And, as a result, because you have those two waves, you have a lot of companies on the landscape, and there hasn't been a lot of consolidation in the industry so far. Like everybody's been talking about it, hasn't really happened. So mathematically, you just get more and more companies on the landscape every year so far.
Yeah. If I were going to author some brilliant takedown tweet and roast some part of this effort, I would, which I don't really do Twitter anymore, so God bless for those who do.
Probably a good idea.
I would complain about the right hand side of the graphic, where you have a bunch of stuff that's it's applications, and I think you made the argument that everybody's claiming to be an AI application now, which look, I get it, but also once you just have applications there, then how many thousands of SaaS products are there? And it's hard to know who to include and who not to include. What made you kind of start to include those types of companies?
So that's a great question. The core principle of what we're trying to do here is to show that data is a continuum. and you start with, how to get data, how to store data, how to process data. And then somewhere in the middle, you got like data analytics, right, which is a whole BI route. Or you have machine learning and AI, which is creating predictive analytics based on the data. But all of this ultimately is for the sole purpose of creating applications that enable end users, mostly business users, but sometimes data analysts, sometimes more technical users, to do something. There absolutely has been a temptation to break down the landscape into multiple landscape, one for data infrastructure, one for machine learning, one for applications. But the core design principle, and it's very much an editorial choice, is to show that symbiotic relationship between all of those moving parts. So in some ways, it is multiple landscapes into one landscape for the same price.
Free. Do you have a take on the statement that basically every software company is a data company, and that on some level, if you're building a software product and you do not allow your users to take advantage of some type of data analytics, then you're like missing some type of opportunity there?
I think there is a lot of truth to that equally, especially when it comes to AI. I think that's more of an end result rather than the current state of things. I do think there is a wide spectrum as of today in terms of how companies use and leverage data, machine learning, and AI for their applications. So I think ultimately, nobody's going to talk about like a database driven company. So maybe in a few years, nobody will talk about an AI driven company because you're successful.
It's like saying a code driven company, like, yeah, of course you use code.
Yeah. The reward for success and ubiquity becomes invisibility, and I think that's been true for databases or code or whatever. That eventually will be true for AI, but not just yet. Actually, have a very different take on this, which is that I think for the most part, AI is still in the general territory of deep tech. You read on tweets or the press or whatever that it's all like commoditized. Look at these large language models and they don't build any kind of competitive advantage or like any of the things. And I just don't think that's really true as of now. So yes, you can build, one of those thin wrappers on top of OpenAI to do something. But the second you want to try to do something that's more interesting, more specialized, more customized to your needs, I think you start, you have to go into the more technical stuff. And as you go into the technical stuff, I think it's a lot more complicated than people think and requires specialized skills and specialized people.
Okay, so great. Let's go there. The actual landscape is good, but probably the value from my perspective is the blog post that you launch with it, which is, God, I have to keep scrolling. 20 plus themes, something like that.
It's same thing. Multiple, you see, that's like a recurring thing. There's like multiple market maps into one market map, and effectively multiple blog posts into one blog post. Very much to your point at the beginning of this conversation.
No, it's. I think the themes are brilliant because they are the result of your thought process of like putting together this graphic, and in the process you have to have all these thoughts and you dump them all out, and it's fantastic. But there is this difference between building Pinecone and using Pinecone, or building Mixtral versus using Mixtral. And to the credit of the folks building these products, they are significantly easier to use than they were a year ago. Pretty accessible. Like, I remember a year ago, I first learned about retrieval augmented generation, and I was just like, oh, that's cool. But it was like not widespread knowledge at that point in time. But today, your contention that in order to get good results, you kind of have to dip into the tech, that feels at odds with like the developer experience, the like level of accessibility of some of these things today. Do you think that like in order to build the next, Jasper AIs of the world, that you really need to dip that deep into the tech?
Yeah. So again, I think it's a spectrum, right? And there's a lot of products on the market. That's one thing that this landscape shows, is that a lot of companies, lots of products, and different products are going to be at different levels of accessibility and abstraction. But where I was going with the prior comment, that especially seen from the perspective of a venture investor in companies that are trying to do something with AI to deliver a product for their end customers, it seems that a lot of the value comes both from the application, but also the ability to go into the tech and do interesting things with it.
And this is not just prompt engineering. This is like
That's right.
providing interesting context.
Yes, so like fine tuning, playing with the weights, all sorts of different variation, and certainly RAG and bringing like different types of data, to customize all of it. But I think of those companies as full stack companies. So when I think of it from an investment perspective, for application companies, my personal interest as an investor, I tend to gravitate towards companies that have that full stack approach. Which is a different thing to say, the end users of those companies don't need to know how the sausage is made.
Sure. Do you think that there's going to be this kind of like standard startup playbook where at your seed round, you have generally used OpenAI and their APIs to get kind of generic results. And then at your A, maybe you're using open source models with some like better processes. And then by the time you get to your D round, like maybe you've built your own models and you're hosting them yourself or something. Do you see this type of a progress emerging?
Yeah, that's a super interesting thought. So it's too early to see it, but do I think it makes a lot of sense? Absolutely. And you can think of it in terms of performance, but you can also think of it in terms of cost. Building an entire company on top of OpenAI and being subjected to whatever they decide to do in terms of cost feels complicated. And what I do see is the emergence of hybrid architectures where companies will use multiple models. And that's exactly as you said, like the beginning, you sort of experiment with the easiest thing, which can be a Claude or it can be an OpenAI. And then bit by bit, they either develop their own or take some open source stuff and start customizing it. And the end result is increasingly looking like this complex hybrid architecture where to understand the query, you'll use OpenAI because it understands anything one may want to ask it. But to answer precise question, then route to model A or small model B kind of thing. So is that going to be a path from C to D? I don't know yet, but that makes a lot of sense to me. Do I see this hybrid architecture emerging? Yes, very fast.
Yeah. Okay. We're like right next to this topic, so maybe let's go there. We were talking about kind of how you construct an application level product on top of the kind of foundational models. You had some thoughts in your themes around the underlying models and how much differentiation they provide. I thought it was interesting. A lot of people have made the point that probably there's not a ton of differentiation there in the long term because it seems like OpenAI is out in front, then Claude is out in front, then Mixtral is out in front, and it's like it's hard to maintain an edge there. But at the same time, the point that is very obvious, but you made really well was, well, it turns out they're making a shit ton of money, so it's not going badly.
Yes.
But how do you see this evolving?
Yeah, look, I think that's actually a variation of what we were just discussing, which is that a lot of those big LLM providers are very quickly, or perhaps even natively, evolving into full stack companies. So if you look at an OpenAI, yes, they do all those incredible models that we know, but then on top of them, they're trying very hard to build plenty of applications. So there's an application for data analysis. There is a marketplace. There is a consumer chatbot search engine. So they try to do lots of different things and capture value there, which I think ultimately is the way to go. And as you just pointed out, I think they're doing just fine right now. And if you compare this to cloud hyperscalers, in some ways, there's a lot of parallel, which is that you'd have a hard time arguing that the storage and compute at an Azure versus an AWS versus a GCP is fundamentally differentiated. Yet, as we know, that's where they make most of their money, and the way they attract and retain customers is by that layer above, which you could argue is an application layer or not, because it targets mostly developers. But it feels like the comparison is pretty apt.
I really like that comparison. And yeah, if you'd had kind of a 2 glasses of wine conversation back in 2017 about the future of cloud infrastructure, Kubernetes was just really taking off, and you would probably say something like, well, it's all just Docker containers, and it's so easy to move a Docker container from one to the next, so it's all going to be commodity infrastructure. And what do you know? They're freaking fantastic businesses that are still growing very persistently at massive scale. So if you kind of extend this analogy, then you've got OpenAI trying to be a cloud provider for the AI era. Is there a reason that there would be a different category of cloud provider for the AI era as opposed to just cloud provider?
You mean what's a layer below that?
Well, is there a reason that instead of a company like, well, OpenAI is a hard one because the relationship with Microsoft and Azure, but that the Azures, Amazons, and Googles of the world don't just kind of dominate this space too?
Well, that's certainly what they're trying to do.
Yeah,
that's really what it is. I think that's a fascinating topic, a fascinating question, and like I mentioned some of this in the piece, but we're playing around as we do at FirstMark at the end of like each year with what our 2024 predictions were going to be, and like a lot of companies, we have like silly prizes for whoever wins and all those things. And one of my 2024 predictions internally was that OpenAI and Microsoft would have some kind of public divorce in 2024. And look, it's this prediction and deliberately provocative, but it feels like they are going to, over time, whether that's 2024 in the future, just increasingly compete. And clearly, OpenAI has massive ambitions to do all the things like what we were describing earlier, around marketplace and enterprise tools and developer tools and consumer and all the things. They're clearly trying to be all the things. Obviously, Microsoft also wants to be all the things and in some way already is all the things. And then Microsoft, as we all know, has been playing effectively 4D chess, in this emerging ecosystem. Obviously, with that very impressive bet in OpenAI in 2019, right, like before the whole thing really started or became very apparent. But also, investing in Inflection AI, which had a product Pi that was directly competitive with ChatGPT, and then very spectacularly sort of acquiring them a few weeks ago, and then also partnering with Mistral, which is a direct competitor to the GPT models, and they undercut that whole thing. So clearly, Microsoft is hedging their bets. Clearly, Microsoft is thinking long term. Clearly, Microsoft views that AI layer as something that they need to own if they can, or at least partner very closely across multiple different players. So, like, at what point does that frenemy kind of a relationship become too difficult to manage? It can go on for many, many years, right? So, I don't know if actually there'll be some issue in 2024, but it feels like there's a collision course somewhere.
Let's stay with Microsoft for a second. It was not surprising that one of your themes was focused on Snowflake and Databricks, and there's certainly plenty to say there. But the thing that I thought was so interesting, and it totally reflects conversations that I've had with folks in the ecosystem, but you ended that section talking about the entry of Fabric into the equation.
Yep.
Now, Fabric is still, in the grand scheme of things, pretty early.
Yes.
And I don't think it has the kind of usability or the penetration into the market that these other two products have. But when Microsoft moves, people take notice. And there's this massive set of existing enterprise relations. I mean, Microsoft has a relationship with basically every enterprise on the planet. And so Fabric is really not to be underestimated. What's your take on how this plays into this kind of like two-party hegemony to date?
Yeah, so look, I agree. It's early. It feels mostly like an announcement. I personally don't have deep visibility into the reality of the product other than what I hear. Is it like a kludgy kind of like effort at stitching together different product that's not totally integrated and all the things? Possibly, probably, that's how the things indeed tend to work, and the reality of a product tends to be, in large companies, 2 years behind the announcement. So I would suspect that there is some element of that going on, but equally, as you said, when a Microsoft comes in with a full platform approach and already has the formidable advantage of having some massively successful and ubiquitous products like Power BI somewhere in the mix, in addition to the footprint they have, that is a major change for anybody that's in the space. And I do think the data infrastructure world is going towards some level of consolidation, in an environment where it's exactly the conversation you and I were having, around the modern data stack a couple of weeks ago. I think customers in a world where they have less budgets and less resources, less time, less people, are evolving away from a best of breed kind of approach to more of a platform kind of approach where, it may not be the best thing for all the different parts of what I need to do, but equally only have one vendor, one procurement process, one contract, one rep, and everything kind of works together. So I think because customers want that and are likely to want that for the next few years, I think you're going to see companies big and small trying to evolve towards that, towards providing just wider footprints. So Databricks clearly is doing that. Microsoft Fabric is clearly an attempt at doing that. I'm not entirely sure what Snowflake is doing, to be perfectly honest. I mean, it sort of feels like they've lost a little bit of product velocity, and it sort of feels like they're missing the boat on AI a little bit. It's a remarkable company, don't get me wrong, obviously. But for a company that had so much velocity, it feels like that has slowed down a little bit. So those companies are doing that, and then there's there's the questions of like the DBTs of the world, where as you guys are just expanding footprint, analytics, and just becoming this platform that's going to cover lots of different things, which I think is an exciting play as well.
Not to speak on behalf of Snowflake here, because I don't have any really insider knowledge of their plans or anything, but I've always found them to be aligned with a solution that is heavily partner driven. So I think that you're 100% right that both Microsoft and Databricks are more focused on building this end-to-end set of capabilities that can all be stamped with the same logo. And I think that Snowflake has demonstrated more of a willingness to build an ecosystem that solves problems via multiple vendors. But I get where you're coming from, and that's not an uncommon sentiment in the space. Okay, racing through a couple more topics. We touched on consolidation a little bit. How far into this trend do you think we are? Do you think we are just seeing the tip of the iceberg? What are the forces that are going to make this 2,000 logos go down to 1,500 logos next year?
I think one of them is cash runway, right? A lot of those logos are startups, and I'm always like hesitant to or like have some qualms like getting into that conversation because I'm a huge fan and supporter of the startup ecosystem. That's why I chose to do the job I do. So talking about the deaths of startups and like mass extinction and all the things always makes me somewhat uncomfortable. But look, having said that, if you look at the world of data infrastructure, actually the whole excitement around the modern data stack, which was really 2018, 19, 20, 21, depending on how you count. As you know, right? Like so many companies were created, so many companies raised money very quickly at very high valuations. You fast forward to today, it's been sort of crickets, right, in that world. So like the heat has really moved away from data infrastructure into machine learning and generative AI. And there's a separate conversation about whether we're making the same mistakes as an ecosystem in AI now than we did in the past. But look, so a lot of companies raise money, and only a few will be able to truly grow into the valuations and actually build meaningful businesses. As we were just saying, I think there's there needs to be functional consolidation. Customers are going to be looking for platforms that do more. So the companies that don't grow into the valuation, don't build a platform, and all the things, there's a lot of smart people out there that saw it coming and then cut their costs pretty heavily in 2021 and 2022. But at some point, even after some rifts and some cost cutting, you can only manage runway for so long. At some point, you just run out of money, and maybe your internal investors, your insiders put more money. Maybe you find somebody else. Maybe you do a down round, that type of thing. But even after that, there's going to be a large category of companies that I think are just not going to make it. So I think in data infrastructure, there's that we're heading in that general direction. And there's been a little bit of this happening. Obviously, it's always harder. It's sadly or something that happens kind of behind the scenes. Obviously, you tend to not have like the the front page of TechCrunch talking about like smaller companies going out of business, but like some of this has already been happening. There's been some acquirers, some soft landings, and that type of thing. But there's going to be a lot more. The big opportunity for those companies, I think, is to then position away from the data infrastructure and becoming part of the AI stack, which a lot of companies are trying to do. But that's a separate thing.
No, that's where I wanted to go next. You talk about the modern AI stack. There's a lot of logos that I think you could put in that category from your diagram. What would you say are the layers in the modern AI stack? So if the quote unquote modern data stack had ingestion and transformation and warehousing and BI, I mean, you could go more layers, but like that was kind of the core four. What do you think the core layers are for the modern AI stack?
I think there's some that are going to be actually more or less the same. So I think, the data needs to live somewhere. And I think, Databricks coming historically from the data lake kind of world and unstructured data is well positioned to be that. So there's going to be that. I think there's going to be an ETL component as well of some sort, and there's some unstructured data ETL companies that are emerging, trying to position themselves. That's you'd argue that Scale does some of that as well through like a different route, but you can think of it as ETL. So data repositories, ETL, and then there is all the stuff around RAG, right? So that you alluded to earlier. So there's going to be vector databases. So obviously vector databases being the place where you take unstructured data and after transformation into a vector format, that's where you store it. So you can feed it to a large language model. So that's another piece. And then you have all sorts of things around evaluation, testing, monitoring, safeguards to make sure that you can control how your LLM performs. There is a concept of router, which is, in the hybrid kind of architecture where we're discussing, where you have multiple models. Where do you send the query to where?
I was just talking to Martian. Have you spoken to those guys?
I haven't, but I've heard the name, yes. So there's like all those different the tools that are emerging, and there's going to be a part of it is going to be the same thing, and then there's a whole emergence of like a specialized tooling, and obviously frameworks like the Llama indexes and the LangChains of the world.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, and that's when we're joking or maybe not joking a minute ago that it sort of feels like we are rebuilding the modern data stack, or let's call it data infrastructure circa 21 madness, and sort of doing it all over again in a different part of the landscape. It's a little bit like that. Take vector database as an example. Everybody raised tons of money very quickly. The Pinecones and Chroma and Quadrant and LensDB, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some of Weaviate, all those companies, and I've had a chance to meet and actually interview a lot of those CEOs, like all very smart people and all the things. And by the way, all those companies had real meaningful traction over the last 12 months. So you could argue whether that's experimental or not, but plenty of traction. But the end result is sort of the same, which is like, okay, you have one category of vector databases, which has like a bunch of different companies competing with one another. Everybody's smart, everybody has raised money. Then what? And by the way, the sort of like general purpose databases like the Mongos of the world have made announcements that they can do vector as well. So whether that, a little bit of the Microsoft thing, to which extent that's true, the same or not, like I don't know, but that's a reality of the market. And also, by the way, there's a bunch of people that say, well, actually, you're not going to actually need a vector database in the RAG world because, or RAG because the context windows are going to just keep getting larger. Therefore,
just
you can
shove the whole thing in.
Exactly. So it doesn't matter. And then, inference costs are going to go down. So it's going to be cheap and all those things. So, it kind of feels like, okay, well, data catalog were like super hot, at some point. And of course you needed the data catalog, but like next thing you know, there's like 25 of them and like everybody's smart. Everybody's raised money from a good vendor, good VCs, and something needs to happen, right? So not to pick on vector databases, but just as an example, sort of feels like it's heading in the same general direction. Which, like, look, maybe is a feature and not a bug of the, we all get excited about new spaces and people want to create great companies and VCs want to invest in great companies and then, may the best one win. So maybe that's how it works.
How are you operating in this environment? Because it is very interesting to see a playbook and then see it mean, maybe it's not exactly the same thing, but like you said, it's like a similar movie playing out here. Do you engage differently as an investor this time around, or if you want to participate in the technology trend, then you just have to pay market rates, and market rates are what they are right now.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I'll tell you the one thing I don't do is accelerate my pace of investment. So I, try very hard, and maybe that's too virtue signaling of a comment, but like I try to remain very disciplined. Like you'd think, because data and machine learning and AI is really my thing and has been my thing for many years now. That the last 12 to 18 months, I'd be like shooting from the hip and trying to invest in like anything that moved, and I've done sort of the opposite, which is that. I've basically maintained my investment pace to be very consistent and to be highly selective. And look, it comes down a little bit to the usual thing. It's sort of like the newbie, the meme where you go from newbie to expert kind of thing. But like, at the beginning you say, invest in the, what does I call that meme? You know what I'm talking about. But at the beginning you say like invest in great people, and then like in the middle you get into like all sort of complicated stuff from an investment perspective, and then on the other side you say, invest in great people. For AI at this stage, it's sort of been a little bit like that. And I'm an early stage investor, right? Like I do Series A, a little bit of seed, and so because that's actually not that many great founders out there. Because rewind to the earlier part of the conversation, because I do think that AI at this stage, to build a differentiated product, you need to, that's more deep tech than people think. Therefore, there's only so many people that can do AI as a deep tech discipline. So optimizing for the relatively small number of people that truly have those backgrounds, has been my approach to the space. And then, like I said, I like full stack applications where there's an application where people do work at the model level, and I do like that sort of middle layer of tooling that we just described, whether we call it the modern AI stack or something else.
What did we not hit? Is there anything else you want to bring forth from the report?
No, I think that was a very good overview. I'm actually interested in your thoughts. There was a section on BI and analytics, and where I was saying, like I'm still not entirely sure why the world of BI has not evolved more dramatically than it has. Right? It feels like this. This that old generation of the tableaus and the lookers, and sort of feels like the we overdue for the next thing to come, and so that's maybe the metrics store and like what you guys are doing, but like why is that not moving faster?
Okay, you were kind enough to mention the kind of semantic layer trend out there, and us and a couple other folks I think you mentioned in there, which I do not believe in text to SQL in an analytics context. Like, okay, if you're doing a Copilot thing and you just want somebody to give you a first draft of the query and then you'll edit it, cool. But if you want to ask a business question and get numbers or a graph, I don't think text to SQL is, and it's not an AI problem. It is just the definitions for these things are socially constructed. We have to all agree on what they are. And I think the semantic layer, whether ours or somebody else's, is the mechanism whereby you kind of socially construct the definitions of these metrics. And so that has to be a part of the process.
So would that be text to semantic layer?
Yes.
To data? Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
So you'd be querying the semantic layer?
Correct. And the answer to the question, why is it taking as long as it is I think the same reason why change in the BI space is generally pretty slow. It's because users want their BI tools to be everything. I mean, I don't know if you've ever talked to Ben Stansel at Mode about this, but he feels like this grizzled war veteran of like, oh my God, do you know how many features you have to build a BI tool? And I think that because the semantic layer is this like piece of infrastructure in the middle, that it doesn't end up having all the control over what the eventual user experience is, which creates challenges to create these great user experiences. One of the things that we've found to be very, very helpful there is that, yes, let's do the BI part of this, but let's also focus on the kind of direct embedded use cases for the API itself. So take the semantic layer and build it into your kind of data powered product. And I think that the unclear thing right now is, what's the first use case that this infrastructure scales to, $100 million annually? And whatever that first use case is, then there will be enough scale in that kind of set of technology for all of the other use cases to follow. But it's never been unclear to me that this is how we're going to do stuff in the future. It's just about the idea maze of like, how do you get to scale? Hey, thanks for coming on.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Great report as always. We will definitely link to it in the show notes.
For anybody listening to this, there is an interactive version to this thing. So it's not just the one big crazy PDF. So if you go to the, mattturck.com/mat2024, there is a link to a high-res PDF, and that's a link to interactive version. So the interactive version, I think, is reasonably helpful. And now we have a search functionality, and we have for each logo, there's a data card provided by CB Insights. So that should make the whole thing much more usable. Just like a little plug for the interactive version that a lot of people seem to be missing.
That's good. When are you going to spin the whole research organization out into its own kind of mini Gartner?
That's why I do this only once a year. As you said, it's a part of the job for sure, but it's night and weekends job.
All right, Matt. Thanks so much. I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Tristan.
The Analytics Engineering Podcast is sponsored by DBT Labs. I'm your host, Tristan Handy. Email us at podcast@dbtlabs.com with comments and guest suggestions. Our producers are Jeff Fox and Dan Poppy. If you enjoyed the show, drop us a review or share with a friend. Thanks for listening.